Imagine surviving the genocide of your people, being enslaved by the very same people who killed your family and murdered your community. Then finding yourself purchased, hired by a white man who takes you to America where you experience this life of a performer, only to then find yourself back in your home country where you left under the most harrowing of circumstances. So, of course, things just can't go back to normal. So, you ask the same white man who you've now befriended to take you back with him to America to experience the new life that you've grown accustomed to. You get there, you're given a job at a zoo. You're thinking, great, I'm going to be here. I'm going to help take care of the animals. And then you turn around and realize now you're part of the exhibition, and not in a good way. That is the life of someone who we're going to talk about in this video. His name is Ota Benga, or Ota Benga. I'm going to call him Ota because I could not find a pronunciation of his name. And he is very well known for being the Black man who caused quite an uproar in the early 1900s in New York. Stay tuned to find out how, and to find out how his role in history made a mark that some people know about, but a lot of people don't. So let's dive into the story of Ota Benga. First thing first, I want to start by mentioning that this is a story of a person who experienced atrocities. However, in that experience, it was a layered experience of atrocities. And so I'm going to mention a few of them throughout his life story. But one of the things I want to highlight at the beginning of this is Ota Benga's experience in the United States was not in the South. Ota Benga was not brought to the United States to be a part of chattel slavery. And so, you wouldn't find him on a plantation. You wouldn't find him working in kind of some of the more commonly heard narratives that we learn about the Black experience in America. Ota Benga's experience was as a part of the World's Fair, but also the Bronx Zoo in New York. So and we'll talk about this when we talk about more of his story, he did live in the South. The time that he spent in the South, he was actually with a Black family. So where he was treated the worst and where his humanity was denied the most was not in the South. It was in New York and in the various places that the World's Fair traveled at that time. So, and the reason why I want to point that out is because there's this misconception that when Black people in America have these very horrific and atrocious experiences, it is largely in the Southern region. That's not true. And so I think it's important to say that, but to also say that a lot, because the misconception needs to be released, just as that does not need to be a common idea. And so I want to continue to do my part to break that norm that the South is not the only place that Black people in America experience very terrible and atrocious treatment by white people in society at large. So who was Ota Benga? Ota Benga was a Mbuti man, and he was from the Congo. He was a Central African forager, which is a group of people that are most known for being small in stature. Another term for the Central African foragers are pygmies. I don't want to call him a pygmy because in my research, I found that was actually deemed a derogative term. And so I did not want to use derogatory language to describe Ota Benga because I don't want to lessen his humanity by calling him something that some people have deemed derogatory. But the reason why I'm explaining this is because this is a group of people that were known for being small in stature. There are people who are Central African foragers who live to this day. It's not like it's people that no longer exist. But that was why. So when I say Central African forager, that's what I'm referring to. And the name, so just to provide some context, Central African forager, it came from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle of this particular group of people, which, in the intro I mentioned, and I'm going to talk about more, Ota Benga was a hunter. That was his occupation, and that was how he contributed to his larger community. So let's talk about his story, because it's a harrowing story. While Ota Benga was away on a hunting expedition, his wife and 2 children were killed by the Force Publique. And that was a militia that was established in the Congo by King Leopold of Belgium. So it's this group of people. King Leopold is on his colonizer, taking over of, other societies' bag, and he establishes the Force Publique, which is a militia, which sounds very similar to the police here in the States. So, but these people kill Ota Benga's wife and 2 children. And this group was created to control and enslave the natives of the Congo. And the reason why King Leopold was there and, killing and decimating these populations and ruining families and lives is he wanted to gain access to the large natural supply of rubber that's in the area. And so not only, were they killing people just by the virtue of kind of the conqueror, the colonizer approach, they were also enslaving these people to harvest the rubber. And so Ota Benga is off on a hunting trip, as per the usual for a young man of that time who has a family to take care of and a community to contribute to. But he comes back, his family has been killed, and his people are also being killed. So there is an attempted genocide that's happening with his community. After that happened, he was captured by the Bashalele slave traders. I probably said that wrong, so apologies if I did. That was another word I could not find a pronunciation for. But also, they were also called the Lele or Lili slave traders, and they were holding him captive. And then he came, Samuel Werner in 1904 crossed paths with these slave traders and saw that they were holding out a capture, and was like, hey, I'm looking for some Central African foragers to take back to America for the World's Fair. So can I purchase that young man? So he purchases him. Now, Werner is in this region looking for some Central African foragers to take back to the U.S. for the St. Louis World Fair. How many of us have heard that term? Never would have necessarily connected it to, people being kidnapped in their native lands and taken back to perform. But that's what Samuel Werner was in the Congo to do. So he was there to kidnap people and take them back to the United States. So he gets Ota Benga. He is actually able to purchase him from the slave traders for a pound of salt and a boat of cloth. And, to support his narrative of, no one at that time, it was 1904. So I'm sure in some instances, because, slavery had been abolished, it's after the Civil War, saying you were enslaving people was probably considered passé to the white people at the time. So he didn't say that he purchased him. He said that he saved Ota Benga from cannibals. So that was his narrative that he brought back and he used to explain how he came to be in the company of this young man. And I call him young man because I think around that time, Ota was probably in his early 20s, definitely like 20, kind of early 20s. And so definitely in the eyes of his community, a full grown adult. He had a wife, he had children, like he had a family to care for. But he was not, a teen or a child. He was a man. And but he was of small stature. So it's very likely that when he crossed paths with people in the United States, they thought that he was a child, but he wasn't. He was an adult. And so Samuel Werner takes Ota Benga, and he travels around the Congo for 2 weeks with him, looking for more Central African forager people to kidnap, to take to the United States. He's not successful because obviously Samuel is not the type to kind of roll up on people and want to snatch folks up. Like he traded to get Ota to be able to have him in his company. So so essentially he's trying to convince people to come with him. They don't trust him because King Leopold has come to the region and decimated it and been a terrible colonizer. So the people in the Congo are looking at Samuel like, I'm not coming with you to go where? So that you can do what to me? No, it's cool. It's good for me. But he has Ota with him. And so he convinces Ota to act as his representative to pitch to the Central African foragers and also just the other people who lived on the continent to come with them. So he does. So he kind of becomes like his pitch man. Like, no, this is a nice guy. He's not going to enslave us. We're actually going to go and become performers. We're going to get paid. We're going to be able to have this really great experience in this other country. It'll be great. And it works. So he's able to convince several of other men, Central African foragers and not Central African foragers, to come back with him and Samuel to the US. And they were added as an exhibit as part of the St. Louis World Fair. Now, the St. Louis World Fair traveled to multiple cities, but that's something that I remember hearing about a lot in elementary school. Like, it was this really cool event and people would, wait excitedly for it to come to their city, and it would be like this whole thing. But in a lot of the descriptions of it, a lot more focus was paid to, the games, the rides. There might have been exhibitions, but not, more of a circus. But one of the exhibitions was that they would go and get people from different parts of the world and have them featured in an exhibition that kind of was set up to look like where they lived. So they would create like huts or something that is supposed to kind of mimic the real life living conditions of these quote unquote exotic individuals from different parts of the world that the people in America were not accustomed to seeing and experiencing. So they were treated like a display. Another thing that Samuel really loved about Ota was that his teeth were filed to points. Now, this was customary of the Umuti people in the Congo as a form of decoration, but also as kind of a rite of passage. So, you become a man, you have these different body adornments, and one of those body adornments was filing your teeth into points. So this is something that was just a part of Ota's culture, but Samuel saw that as another great selling point for having him perform in the World's Fair. And so, however, while they were on the continent, finding people, Samuel comes down with yellow fever, malaria. Samuel comes down with malaria. So he's not with Ota and the other men when they get to the place where they're participating in the St. Louis World's Fair. So they get there, and of course the people with the fair kind of take them and put them into the exhibitions. And but they were cast as these, as we can expect. They were cast as kind of savages. Now, because it didn't really say if Ota spoke English. It didn't say if he did or didn't, or if Samuel also spoke, if there was like a common language, like it didn't say how they overcame any communication barriers they might have had. So they don't really know the nuance of what's happening and the situation that they're in. what they do realize is that they're famous. People are coming to see them. They're clamoring. They're in droves. They want to see these exotic people. And so they would charge people to see them perform. It definitely put me in the mind of when I traveled to Italy and we visited the Colosseum, and there are people who will kind of walk around the Colosseum, and it's similar to New York, but I don't know if they charge, or not New York, I guess California, but I haven't seen it in California. I saw it in Italy, but where you have people that are dressed up like the warrior, people that were dressed up of the time of when they were doing the fights and things in the Colosseum during kind of the ancient Roman times. And you could take pictures with them, you could take pictures of them, but they'll charge you to do that. I've read, and I think that they do something similar in California on like Sunset Boulevard. I think that's the wrong name. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but where the people might be dressed up like different superhero characters or other various characters. And if you want to take a picture with them or something like that, they'll charge you. Vegas is another place where you'll see that. And so that's what it put me in the mind of, where, the guys are like, oh, we're famous. We can make money off of this. And so they're charging the people to perform. Now, they would have their times where they were performing for the show, but then they would have their times where they're just off and they're just moving around the world and having their downtime. But the people, largely namely white people, in those areas wouldn't let them just be off. So like they might be, out chilling at a lake, having some downtime, relaxing, and people would still kind of come and hound them and want them to perform and want them to basically, dance for them. And so they couldn't get a day off, and people expected them to perform whenever they saw them. And so what happened is Werner Samuel comes back, he gets better, he comes and he sees, wow, these men that I brought over here that are supposed to be performing are actually being treated like prisoners, where they can't live a life. They're supposed to be perform at a drop of a dime, at a moment's notice, when just because someone wants them to. And so he had promised them that after they were done with the tour, that he would take them back to the Congo or whatever various part of that region that they were from once everything was over. So he did this. This is how I'm sure he assuaged his guilt of essentially kidnapping them or bringing them here under false pretense. Because I won't say he kidnapped them per se, because, he had Ota there. He kind of told them that there's this opportunity to perform. That was how he presented it. But they were just not treated as performers. They were treated as prisoners who were there to make the people happy, at even to their own, expense. So he took them back. He was like, all right, it's over. I told you guys I would take you back. So he did. So he did stick to his word, which I'm sure went a long way in the eyes of Ota, who had experienced these very terrible atrocities at the hands of people, where, Samuel actually said he was going to take them. They had this opportunity to make money, have this experience, and then he was going to return them to their home. And he did that. Now, while they were when he did go back to the continent with Ota, that he stayed there. So Samuel kind of was, doing whatever he was doing in the area. And during that time, though, Ota was like, all right, I'm back. Let me try to, go back to normal, back to the semblance of normalcy. So he found him a wife, got married, and tried to settle down back into the life that he was building initially with his first wife and his children before. But this time he was living with the Batwa people. But his second wife died after being bitten by a snake. So it feels like, and I'm laughing because it's not funny, it's just ironic. It's like Ota was, it just made me think of you going along, your life is what it is, you're happy with this life, you've built this life that you want to have, you're doing these things, and then something comes and completely derails all of your plans. And so what a lot of us do, because this time, Ota's still a fairly young man, what a lot of us do is, as soon as we kind of get past the disruption, we try to go back to the life that we initially thought we would have. And that's what he did. But that didn't work out. And so after his wife died after being bit by a snake, has maintained contact with Samuel. And he's like, hey, can I come back with you to the United States? Because trying to do this here is just not working. So let me go back with you. You know, he remembered while things weren't great in the United States, it was different. And I'm sure he made good money in the grand scheme of things being a performer. So who wouldn't want to make that change into an opportunity where you can still take care of yourself and still be able to build a life? And so in 1906, Ota and Samuel returned to the U.S. Their first stop was the American Museum of Natural History, where he was employed as a performer there. He earned $175 a month salary, which is fantastic for 1906. But he was there and he got homesick. Of course, I'm sure homesick, culture shock, like all of that. You know, you're in this place and there are people that you're not surrounded by people that look like you. They treat you like a sideshow, but you're there, but he's homesick. So he started acting out. And the curator of the museum at the time, whose name was Henry Bumpus, he already didn't like having to pay Ota $175 a month salary. He thought that was too much in spite of his popularity as a performer. And because Ota started to feel homesick, and, you know, I'm sure he also was picking up on just like the negative energy around his performance and kind of how he was being treated, he kind of leaned into the whole role of playing the quote unquote savage, and he started to make people uncomfortable. So Henry Bumpus contacted Samuel and was like, hey, he gotta go. Why don't you take him to the New York Bronx Zoo? At the time, the New York Bronx Zoo was fairly new. So they were looking for things to, you know, get people to come and participate, and let's have these exhibitions. So Samuel was like, you know what, that's a good idea. Ota can work at the zoo. He can work with the elephants, and he'll be able to pitch in and provide some value as an employee. He won't necessarily be hired as a performer, because also what was not said in a lot of the things that I read was that I'm sure Samuel was starting to see that Ota was not being treated well when he was a performer. And so he tried to solve it, to his limited credit, by saying, let's just put him somewhere where he can have a job. So he's not a performer, he's just working, helping to take care of the animals. However, when he got to the zoo, the director of the zoo, whose name was William Hornday, saw that people would see Ota, he would be in the animal enclosures doing, as when you're at the zoo and you might see some of the employees in with the animals, either feeding them or cleaning or whatever, they would see him. And remember now, Ota looks like a child. He's small in stature. So they're probably thinking there's this, kid who obviously is, not from here. And so they would see him and they would be curious about him. So Hornday, the person that he was, it's not a compliment, he decided that he wanted to put Benga or Ota in the exhibition. So he incorporated Ota into the monkey exhibit. And the way that he did it, and it was in 1906. So what he did was he kind of set it up where you had, you had the monkeys, you had Ota, and then you had a white man. And so what it was communicating was that Ota was the missing link between monkeys and white men. And so this is what he's doing, William Hornday is doing in 1906. Now, remember that in 1906, Black people are no longer enslaved. So in New York, they have this pretty they have a large, Black community, and they have a Black clergyman. So the Black community in New York in 1906 find out about Ota being featured in this exhibit as, the missing link between monkey and men and white men, and they raise the alarm, and they're just like, this is terrible, and no, we're not going to put this man in this exhibit as if he is either a monkey or somehow less than white men or more similar to a monkey. We're not going to do that. That's a no for us. And so they raise a big stink. However, the mayor of New York at that time, George McClellan, refused to even meet with the clergymen to hear their grievances about why this is not okay. And so Hornaday, of course, loved it. He actually was considered an important figure in the history of American conservatism, and in American conservation. So he was very big with animals and conserving animals, etc. And so here's something that I found in an article in New York Times about what was happening at the time, and it struck me, and so I wanted to read it verbatim, just because it shows the nefarious dehumanization that was happening to Ota when he was just trying to figure out his life and have a life and, be a happy person. So here's the quote. Mayor George McClellan, for example, refused to meet with the clergymen or to support their cause. For this, he was congratulated by the zoo's director, William Temple Hornaday, a major figure not only in the zoo's history, but in the history of American conservation, who wrote to him. This is the part. This is what he wrote. When the history of the zoological park is written, this incident will form its most amusing passage. He wrote it off as a joke. Not only this dehumanization of this man, but the outrage of the Black community at this dehumanization. He saw this as a source of amusement. Now, at the time, Ota was a popular attraction at the zoo. Now, one of the things that I also want to point out was I read this New York Times article, which is the link below. They described Ota's life at the zoo. And one of the things that this article made it a point to say was that Ota wasn't, immediately placed into a cage at the zoo and made a part of the exhibition. He was allowed to move about as he pleased. Like I said, he was initially hired to work there, to work as an employee. And so he would, but he took to the animals, mostly the monkeys. He took to them as a lot of people who love animals do. There's a particular animal you connect with, and so you begin to spend more time with those animals. And so what would happen, he would just be in the habitats with the monkeys, spending time with them because he thought they were cool animals. And Hornaday saw that, he would spend time in the habitats with the monkeys, and he put a hammock in the monkey cage and actively encouraged Ota to spend more time there. So that's very insidious. Like, Ota is not assuming that he's there to be a part of the exhibition. He's assuming he's there to work, and he's enjoying the work that he does. So he's finally found some enjoyment in his new life. And then this man, Hornaday, decides to flip it and make him a part of the exhibition. But thankfully, the Colored Baptist Ministers Conference in New York at the time, they made a lot of noise. So they made so much noise that Hornaday decided that it was not the popularity of the exhibition featuring Ota was not worth keeping up, because the Colored Baptist Ministers Conference was just being so vocal about it being wrong. So he decided to shut down the exhibit. Then at that time, Ota was sent to Lynchburg, Virginia, to live with a Black family. But he was sent there to be educated so he could teach his people when he went back home. Because his people needed to be taught what exactly? Nonetheless, so they put him with a Black family, but unfortunately, this is a Black American family. They have no idea how to relate to Ota, but they tried. So, they did what they could. They just could only do so much. Now, I want to make one note. The ministers, the Colored Baptist Ministers Conference, yes, they were against Ota being mistreated as a black man being mistreated by the zoo. However, they were also very much against him representing Darwinism, which they felt was against Christianity. So while they definitely disagreed with just him being a black man and being mistreated, they also were against the fact that he was being kind of shown as a part of the evolutionary process, which they felt was against Christianity. I think it's an important point to make because, there's always layers to these stories. There's always layers. And so while, once he found his way to Lynchburg, Virginia, and he's living with the family, from what I read, they treated him like a child. Now he's an adult, but they treated him like a child. He was small in stature, but he had been married. He was a father, but so he tried to fit in with the people in Virginia. It just didn't work. He became homesick and unhappy again. And in 1916, 10 years after he made his second trip to the United States, he died by suicide because he was unhappy. And his story is sad for various reasons. One, the trauma and the tragedy that he experienced just knows no bounds. So much for one person. And that was in like a very, 10 to 15 year time span of his life. He was just had these different tragic things happen on top of some, not so tragic things, but there was just a lot of tragedy and sadness and loss for this man. And while he finally, knew kindness and knew people who weren't dehumanizing him, when he made it to Lynchburg, Virginia to live with the family, he had gone through so much to get there. It's like, I'm sure they had no way of really understanding and knowing how to relate and connect with him to make him feel comfortable so that he could thrive and he could find his place. And it's just sad that he went through all of that and ultimately decided that it would just be better to, end his life on his own terms, in his life himself, than to continue on. And so that is the story of Ota Benga, who is most well known, if you do Google searches of him, for being a part of the exhibition at the New York Bronx Zoo. And I'll end it there. What do you think about that story? What are your thoughts? Do you have a connection to that zoo that you can kind of share some additional insights? Because in the grand scheme of things, 1916, that was, 104 years ago. So there are plenty of people who, if they're maybe, of course not them directly, but your grandparents or your great grandparents could have either been there, could have gone to the zoo and seen it, could have been a part of the protests. Like there could definitely be some direct connections with people for that time. So I would love if you have your own personal anecdotes, please share them below. If you have thoughts, please share them below. I'm gonna link to the sources that I used to research this story in the comment box, so you can take a look and do some deeper reading. There are some interesting stories which outline, which kind of talk about his experience. I will caution and say this: the articles that I found, there was a lot of tap dancing around the reality of his treatment, and a lot of justification around how the white people who were dehumanizing and using him for their own self-gain, there was a lot of justification for their behavior. So I just warn you to that, because it annoyed me when I was reading the articles, and so it might annoy you as well. But I would definitely love to hear your thoughts. Please, if you have some other stories that are related to Black history, they can be Black American history, they can be from any other place around the diaspora, please email them here. I would love to hear them and love to research them for another episode of this true horror series, where I just talk about the horrific experiences that Black people have had in this world that is so often not included in the history books. So that is it. I enjoyed telling this story. I hope you enjoyed hearing the story. I hope you got something out of it and learned something. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments below. And I look forward to the next time that we can talk again. Bye.